Glory, glory, Christ is mine. Gave his only begotten Son. All who believe in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Therefore, Christ is mine. He gave himself. We begin in Genesis today, Genesis 39. Open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 39. We'll take a look at one little piece out of this verse or out of this chapter. It's going to be about Joseph. Just to refresh your memories on Joseph, he was the son of Jacob, the favored son of Jacob. Brothers were jealous, sold him into slavery. Finds himself in the house of Potiphar in Egypt. Apparently, he was a charming or a good-looking man or something. There was something about him that caught the attention of Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife wanted him to lie with her. This is situation where he had shown himself to be a great worker. Potiphar trusted him with everything, and he ended up having to risk it all. She was so persistent on having this relationship with him that she actually grabbed him by the coat and is trying to entice him. Lie with me. Verse 12 is the verse that I want you to read with me. It says, Genesis 39 and verse 12. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled. Got him out. Out. Later we find out that she's got his coat. She tells a lie about it. And he ends up getting arrested for it. But that's not really what I want us to focus on right now. I want us just to think about how Joseph found himself in a situation here that was, I'm sure, tempting indeed. But the way he handles it is the way I want us to think about for a second. He believed so strongly in resisting the temptation of this woman that as she grabs his garment, he didn't even try to take that garment with him. He left it, he took it off and left it behind, shedding the garment so that he could get away. I'll tell you right now, it honestly reminds me of when my brothers used to chase me and try to beat me up. I'll be running, they grab my coat. Guess what that coat did? Woo, gone. I would shed that weight so I could get away from getting beat up. You know why? Because I valued my safety in that moment more than I valued that coat. I mean, let's be honest now. You was in the woods, hiking along, and a bear grabbed your bag. What would you do with that bag? Bye-bye bag. You'd run for your life. We can see this scenario. We can see the situation very clearly in these kinds of scenarios where there's some things that are more valuable than a nice coat. Some things that are more valuable than a nice bag. You know, I ain't letting go of this bag, bear. You can take my life. No. You let the bag go, you shed the weight, and you run for your life. That's the situation that we have here. When we're running for our life, just have to understand and realize that it's the most obvious thing when it comes to a life and death circumstance when we're in the heat of the moment. Some things are just more valuable than the nice coat. Joseph was willing to sacrifice that coat, leave everything, and run away for his life. Sin does weigh us down quite a bit. Let's just take a look at a couple of verses that kind of make this point for us. One is Psalm 37. Sit on over there with me. I want to show you a verse over there, Psalm 37. This type of metaphor is brought to our attention throughout the scriptures. I'm going to show you just a couple of them. The 37th Psalm is one of my favorite Psalms. And what King David is actually talking about in the Psalm here is he's struggling with the way the rest of the world is. That's a temptation for us. We find ourselves in different scenarios when it comes to how we view the world. I know that it's fresh in the minds of a lot of people, even at this exact moment. The condition of the world. We are, if you haven't turned on the news yet, we're aware of a war happening, another war happening. There's already been a war going on for over a year now overseas. There's another war that's just breaking out. It's difficult not to get angry at the condition of the world, at the ungodliness of world leaders, the corruption of politicians. It's hard sometimes. We go through these emotions whenever the news is on. We go through emotions when media is on, and we struggle with that. David was no exception. He was a king. David was a king. He'd make one decision, and 10,000 men could die as a result of something that he did. Make one mistake, boom, bunch of people die. That's a lot of weight to carry on your own shoulders. So it was difficult for him to see the craziness of the Philistines and all the people that were around him, all his enemies, and not struggle with that weight. So he, in the Psalm, we just take a look at the first verse of the Psalm. He says, "Fret not because of evildoers, neither be envious against the workers of iniquity." And right there, just kind of sets the overall theme. Now take a look at verse 8. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself in any wise to do evil. Now, again, the context, he's talking about how the way of the ungodly, it will perish, it will die. They're like the chaff. The chaff is part of the wheat that's going to blow away. The good stuff stays behind, and the rest of it just blows away in the wind. That's the evil. That's the wicked people. Don't worry about that. Forsake the wrath. Forsake it. I love that because he doesn't say, we'll kind of let it hang around a little bit, but I'm just so angry. He says, get rid of it, cast it away, forsake it, leave it behind. Don't even entertain the anger. This is heavy. There's a proverb that says, sand is heavy and stone is weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than them both. So these kinds of emotions tend to weigh us down. I'll show you another verse that's a very similar thing. It's kind of like Joseph, leaving that coat behind. You know, I know your anger helps you from time to time. It saved your life 20 years ago when you really needed it. Yeah, you gotta leave it behind. It's weighing you down. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, I want to show you another spot that's very similar. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Now, the Apostle Paul is talking to the church that's in Corinth. And you wouldn't believe this. You would not believe the way it was in Corinth in these days. The way it was in Greece in these days. Now, Corinth is a town of Greece, okay? And some of the philosophers that people still study this to this day, some of the philosophers, they came out of Corinth. A lot of smart people that came out of there. But I'm telling you, just because some good stuff came out of Corinth, there's some philosophers, some smart people who believe the condition that some of the people are. You know, there was a lot of fornication happening in Corinth. Can you believe that? Can you just imagine all the fornication that was going on? You know, there was a lot of rape that would have been going on in Corinth at this time. There was a lot of wicked people. There was a lot of drunkenness happening. You wouldn't believe it if you saw it. It's just insane. The kind of wickedness. There was a lot of corrupt politicians there too. It was crazy what was happening in Corinth. The Apostle Paul was writing to the Corinthians Christians because that kind of stuff that was happening, it's it's starting to mess with their heads too. They're starting to think, well, maybe I want to live that kind of life. Can it continue living that way? And the Apostle Paul makes this statement because, fornication, um, uh, uh, unlawful sexual activity is something that was happening a lot. Now, just take a look at the Apostle Paul's advice on this matter. He's talking about it. Verse 16, or 18 rather, 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 18, the Apostle Paul says, flee fornication. Kind of like Joseph. Take that weight and just leave it behind. Get rid of it. Don't even let it into your life. Run the other way. Now, this is simple stuff. This is the simple Christianity. Now, it's becoming more and more complicated in this day and age. There was a time when this kind of stuff was more taboo in the culture, right? But it's becoming the culture. It's becoming the way. As a result, it's more and more of a struggle for we humans and we Christians trying to coexist in today's modern day society. Now, this is just sin that I'm talking. Fool's wrath, that's sin. Wrath is clearly documented in scriptures as being sinful. A fool's wrath. Fornication, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's no need to say, well, hold on now. Let's, it's very clear in the scriptures. Flee fornication. It's not the Lord's will that we commit fornication or even entertain fornication. Brother Anthony in the Bible classes have been showing us the spirit of the law. Jesus points out that just to even look at another woman, that was one of those things, and to lust after. This is ungodliness. This is sin. It's not something to be a part of our lives. Now, this is just sin I'm talking about still. I want to show you one little aspect, kind of where I'm going with this. And it's going to take us back to our epistle of Hebrews that I've been taking us and walking us through for the last little while now. I'll take you to Hebrews chapter 12 this time. We've been spending a lot of time in the Hebrew epistle. We spend a lot of time in the Hebrew epistle because of the examples of the men of faith. Chapter 11 kind of got us stopped. In the epistle, we've been moving through it pretty good. The 10th chapter, we got a lot of good stuff out of that. But then the 11th chapter, started talking about specific characters, and we've been going a lot of the history. Now, last week we talked about the judges, Samson and Jephthah and Gideon and Barak and all that. And the remainder of the 11th chapter, I'm not skipping over it as much as I'm going to use it as we apply it into some of the other principles that are going to be laid out in the Hebrew epistle. But let's go ahead and read Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1 now. So the context is that a lot of Old Testament stuff is brought up. Jesus fulfilled all the Old Testament good stuff. All the good stuff in the Old Testament, Jesus just took care of everything. All the good stuff in the Old Testament, Jesus fulfilled it all in the new dispensation. Priest, king, the sacrifices, all. Now, after using these examples, talking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Abel, Enoch, whoever else, all these examples, he moves into chapter 12. Chapter 12 is getting into finishing his epistle. One of the major points is to end with triumph, end with the fact that now that we are in the new dispensation, it's even better. We have even more reason to have faith, even more reason to be absolutely committed to the God of heaven than we ever did, because they didn't even have the Son of God in those days. Not the way we do. I'm not gonna don't misunderstand me. They did have the Son of God, but not the way we do. We have the full panoramic view. Jesus coming to offer himself a sacrifice for all sins. That was still a mystery in those days. They had no idea what was going on. And they still gave themselves to the cause. So he talks about in chapter 11, those who subdued kingdoms, verse 33, who worked righteousness, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, and all these things. They did amazing things. Here we are in the new dispensation. All these examples. Now I want you to read with me chapter 12 and verse 1. Hebrews 12 and verse 1, it says, wherefore, so that's like a transitioning into kind of some new material. You're going to start discussing. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, sin which does so easily entangle us. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Okay. Now, this is a really interesting verse. I'm going to tie it into how I started the lesson. I started talking about sin more than anything. Joseph was tempted to lie with another woman, another man's wife. Now, the sin is something that he needed to avoid at all costs. Mentioned anger, fool's wrath, something you need to avoid at all costs. Flee fornication. There's something about this verse that kind of comes out to me. It's actually one of my favorite principles. One I don't honor all that great, but one that this past week has been just pecking at me, and I'm going to share it with you. It's one of those ideas, one of those things. We have kind of a classification of two things happening within this verse. He says, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily entangles. Now, one of the ways that we can understand this concept is to understand that there are a lot of things in existence right now that aren't necessarily sinful. There are a lot of things in your life right now that are in your life that you practice probably regularly, you have in your life, and it's not sinful. I'm going to just claim right now to have a cup of coffee in the morning is not sinful. Not necessarily good for you. It depends what research you do. If you do Starbucks.com, they say it's the best thing in the world for you. Make you fly, like all kinds of stuff. But then you do a lot of other research that say, yeah, but it's not all that good for you. It just depends what research you do, right? There's nothing wrong with a cup of coffee in the morning. There's a lot of things that aren't sinful. Tell you what, I don't know about Joseph's coat. He was a guy who liked coats, probably. He may have hated coats. I don't know. It's kind of ruined his life. That coat of many colors wasn't really a good thing in his life. But was it a sin for him to be sporting this sweet-looking coat, these colors on it? No, it was no sin. Something about Joseph and coats. Now, would it have been a sin for him to fight for that coat when Potiphar's wife grabs onto it and starts hanging on tight? That could have been the end of his amazingly holy streak that he was on. That fight, struggling for his coat, may have been the one thing that held him down just enough to say, well, okay, just this once though, and go ahead and fulfill this deed that she wanted to practice with him. And hey, that was kind of nice. Maybe we'll try it again next week. Next time Potiphar's not hanging around.
Who knows? But there's wisdom in what he did. He left that coat behind. There is something that might be holding you down. There's a lot of stuff in the world. There's a lot of sneaky things that just kind of creep in there. A little piece of advice, a little piece of wisdom. Got a verse right here that's giving us just a little extra. Like, well, keeping yourself from the sin may not be enough. Notice now how he mentions, lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily besets us. You know how he says that so easily? Well, what is it about the so easily? Why does it so easily contain sin? Why does the sin so easily sneak its way in? You know, if we take Christianity seriously, if we take God seriously, then in general, you try to be the best Christian you can possibly be. You see it in the workforce, you see it in sports, you even see it in the way people play video games. Some people want so bad to be good at something, they actually will stay up late at night thinking, if I could just get that one special remote controller, I don't really know if that's even true these days. It's just something. If I could just get this one app that helps me with this particular, people stop and stay up late at night thinking about how they can get better and how can they get a higher score in a game that no one else cares about. People do it with their careers. How can I get to the next level of my career? How can I just get just a little bit more money? And you can be a mediocre, whatever it is that you are, and just stay on the same track. But most people, or a lot of people who put a lot into their career, they're looking for how they can be a little bit better. But how can I be a little bit better of a Christian? You got the tip right here, the advice right here. Lay aside. Now, notice the language. Every weight. Not just some of the weights. Not just some of the things that can hold you down. Lay aside everything. You know what that means? Your job is never done. You're always looking for more. Always looking how you can do better. You can improve your routine. There's a lot of stuff that we could go into with this. Tons of different topics. You might be thinking about a couple right now. Time is one of the greatest elements that you have. What if you could just start by asking, what absorbs my time? That's a real simple way to do it. I've shared from the pulpit many times how I feel about smartphone technology and things like that. You know, one of the reasons why I feel that way about it, because it weighs me down. Not only when it's in my pocket do I kind of lean, to one direction because they're just heavy and inconvenient, but they actually weigh me down. I started leaving it somewhere else in a room by itself, so that when I do my study, every time it jingles, they go, "Oh, what is that?" It just weighs me down. I've shared that many times. It's something that I do. You know what? Humanity existed just fine for thousands of years without smartphone technology. Suddenly, everyone has to get one text, and they have to respond within seconds. That wasn't the way it was for 1,000 years. Why does it have to be that way now? I'm going to weigh down most of my day just so I can respond to somebody within less than 30 seconds, or someone's feeling's going to be hurt, right? You know what? There's a lot of ways we can apply this. I just happen to talk about cell phones a lot. A lot of things. I want to establish this principle a little bit with you. Really want to establish it with you, the importance of this, because honestly, one of the aspects of this subject that's going to ring true for you and kind of motivate a change in your life is going to be how badly you want heaven. I mean, how in love with God you really are. See, if I sat down with you and you said, Dave, I want some career advice, and you may not want to get career advice from me. But if you want career advice, I'd ask you, well, what's weighing you down? How can you do a little bit better at the job, this and that? I'd say, well, how much time does it take to make these calls? Can you be more efficient with those calls? I mean, you're spending 2 hours a day making these particular calls. Why don't you just automate it in emails? Oh, wow, I never thought of that. There you go. Just save 2 hours a day. How many does that amount to a year? Your life just got better. You're going to get a little bit higher in your career. That people ask these kinds of questions. But then when it comes to heaven, when it comes to God, people think, I've been doing pretty good. One church service a week. Pick up my Bible maybe occasionally. Someone sends me a daily verse every day. Getting pretty studious, Well, let's be honest now. How badly do you really want God in your life? Are you willing to give up some stuff that you don't really need? Because I'm going to tell you right now, if the God of heaven amounted how much time, tallied up how much time you spent on something versus how much time you spent in prayer, it would look ridiculous. Is that not true? Can we not all admit that? The amount of time I spent on the TV the last year versus the amount of time I spent in prayer. I mean, there's some people in this room probably who it might even be 10 times the amount of TV versus the time of prayer with God. That's ridiculous. That's insane. And I can say that right now, and you can agree with me right now, and you may not make any changes at all tomorrow. You may not do a thing about it, but that's ridiculous. If you were actually face to face with Jesus and he said, well, you spent 5 hours today on your phone and you spent 5 minutes praying this morning, he'd probably say, no wonder you're not as holy as you'd like to be. No wonder your faith is weaker than it ought to be. And you just gotta go on and then, well, good point, Dave. And then, whoa, wonder what's on. Start clicking. The advice is right here. Remove those weights. And I can tell you right now, there are some people in this room who I have had some pretty personal conversations with. And everyone that I know who has removed things from their life to spend more time on the Word has not regretted it. It's an absolute 100% guarantee. You think that dude with the Men's Warehouse, you said, I guarantee. You think he can guarantee something? He can't guarantee nothing. You don't even know what I'm talking about, the commercial. You know what I'm talking about? Men's Warehouse. You're going to like the way you look. I guarantee. He can't guarantee nothing. The God of heaven can guarantee you something. You spend time in his word, you will not regret it. But you will regret talking to the God of heaven on the judgment day, and he ties it up and says, what did you really care about? What did you actually do with your Christian life? What did you actually do with the blood of my son? Now that's what Pilate asked when they presented Jesus to Pilate. He said, what will I do with he that is called Christ? What are you going to do with him? What are you going to do with this advice? Well, I want to establish this with you. Luke chapter 9, I want to show you a verse here. Luke chapter 9, verse 61. I really like this section. Jesus is, even though we're not that far under Luke, According to my studies, Jesus is over halfway through his ministry. And I don't know like the timeline that well. That takes like a lot of like kind of like counting stuff and doing all that kind of thing. But I do know that Jesus had already been transfigured and he's already on his last journey south to be crucified. So he's in the latter end of his ministry. So the last like rest of the book of Luke is all about his journey from the northern country down to Jerusalem, where he's going to be crucified. And on his way down, he's got a reputation. People know who he is. He's doing miracles. He's healing people, and a lot of good stuff is happening. And there are a handful of people who say to Jesus, "I want to be your disciple. We've been waiting for the Messiah. I want to be a disciple." There's three instances that happen right here in this context. We're on his way down south to Jerusalem. Three people approach him. The first one, he says, "You want to follow me? Well, you may not have a place to live and follow me. Foxes have holes, birds have nests, son of man's got nowhere to lay his head." Okay? Next one, he says, "Well, hey, let me bury my father first." And he says, "Let the dead bury the dead. You just do what I say. You follow me. You don't worry about that stuff." The next one is the main one I want to focus on now. Verse 61, it says, "And another also said, Lord, I will follow you, but let me first bid them farewell, which are at my house." And Jesus says to him, "No man having putting his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God." Now that's a little principle that I want us to use for this lesson. Because if you even spend any time looking back on the world, looking back on your past life, looking back at all these things that have literally cost you your soul at one time, because if you didn't have Jesus, you'd be condemned, okay? You would be judged for eternity. So those sins and all this wasted time stuff that the world's been partaking in all these years is costing people their souls. So he's laying a foundation right here. When you put your hand to that plow, you don't look back. You look forward. And you see how you can do better and better and better. You make sure you stay on the straight and narrow path. You don't pass to your left hand or to your right hand. You don't look back. You don't mess with any of that kind of stuff. And you take this serious. Jesus says, not fit for the kingdom of heaven. You don't put your hand to the plow and look back. Now, chapter 17 of the same book of Luke, Jesus makes another statement that's very similar to this. Like I said, still he's on his journey, on his way back down to Jerusalem. The scriptures will often say up to Jerusalem because it was higher elevation. Also, they thought of Jerusalem as a holy place, like a higher plane, But I keep saying down to Jerusalem because south means down in our language. He's on his way up to Jerusalem, south to Jerusalem. He's being questioned a lot. There are a lot of people asking questions. The disciples are with him, and he's giving them these teachings. Verses 22 through 37, there's a brief monologue of Jesus. And when you look at the text, it can be a little bit hard to tell what's happening. Is he talking about the destruction of Jerusalem? Because not long after Jesus was crucified, Rome came in, and this is all prophesied. Rome came and just circled around the walls of Jerusalem and just butchered those people. It was horrific what happened. And Jesus warned his disciples, he warned people, saying, if you guys don't listen to me, it's gonna be rough. It'll be bad. Some people may think that he's talking about the end of the world in this text. Either way, these principles ring true for you and me. Either way, when Jesus did offer these kinds of teachings, he would say and make statements like, what I say to you, I say to everybody, watch. What I say to you, I'm saying to everybody right now, pay attention. And he starts talking about this period of time, the way it's going to be. Verse 26 It says, and as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. So in the days of Noah, people did not care. People had all kinds of just things weighing them down. They didn't give any glory to God, they didn't give any credit to God and all that kind of stuff. So he goes on continuing. He also uses Lot in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah as a similar metaphor or example. Verse 29, take a look at that with me. But the same day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from the heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Now watch verse 31. Check this out. In that day, he that is on his housetop and stuff in the house. The King James says stuff. He got stuff in his house. Let him not come down to get it. He that is in the field, let him likewise not return back for it. Remember Lot's wife. Remember Lot's wife. Three words right here. Remember Lot's wife. You guys remember Lot's wife? Sodom and Gomorrah was on fire. They were told specifically, don't look back. Lot's wife looked back, and she's out there somewhere right now in the form of salt. Turned into a pillar of salt. And it says in verse 33, whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it. Whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. I spent all week trying to figure out what kind of things that I wanted to talk about. You know, the obvious answer for me whenever I'm preaching, it's because we live in the age of cell phones, and I see the danger of these smartphones. I can't stand them. I wish they would go back to where they came from. I can't stand them. They're weighing down so many people's souls. They just are a nuisance on mankind. But that's not what I selected to talk about as like the main way that we can promote. There's all kinds of stuff we can talk about, right? Your career, that could be one. These are, you know, remember, we're not talking about something that's necessarily sinful. It may not be sinful. Having a career is not a sin. Being good at what you do is not a sin, but it can sure weigh you down. It can sure take way more precedence in your life than God. It can take more precedence than your family. There's a reason why we use the word workaholic, because a lot of people put more time in that. There's a lot of people who put up, is it wrong to have too much square footage for your house? Is it wrong to have a couple extra bedrooms in your house? The answer is no. That's okay. But we as American society have put so much into that everyone has to work. If we just took a second look at what we're doing with our lives, my mentor, am I yelling at you guys too much? I'm just on a soapbox up here, man. I'm just preaching. I think Jeremiah maybe yelled at the audience too sometimes, you know. I'm not trying to yell at anybody. Back to what I was saying. So, my mentor had 8 siblings, and they grew up in like this little itty bitty like cottage out in the country. And we feel like we have to, well, everyone's got to have their own bedroom, everyone has to have their own phone, their own TV. It's insane, the difference between them and who we are now. And because of that, women can't stay home with the kids anymore because we got to have more, better stuff. So a bunch of kids come home to nothing. And divorce is rampant all over the land because that's just the way it is. Husband says, well, my secretary actually listens to me, so I'm going to go after her. I heard one guy say, well, give your wife a salary, let her off at 5, see what happens. Takes work, baby. And we're in that culture. You remember when I was talking about Corinth? You wouldn't believe how insane the culture was. It was okay to just have premarital sex like it was nothing. Oh, sounds like America. It's nothing anymore. It's on every chick flick. Girls think they're all right because they ain't watching porn. That's female porn. This is the truth. Every time you turn that on, you think, oh, how romantic. Oh, look how hot it's getting. Oh. You're watching something that God detests, and you're getting warm, fuzzy feelings about it. And I'm the psycho preaching the word. I look like a nut. My brother just preached or taught in the class this morning. He's saying, what ain't so bad according to whose standard? Not God's standard. We got all kinds of stuff just weighing us down. All kinds of things. There's no mystery why there's so much pain and agony in the world. The sin so easily entangles us because we're not willing to give up a couple of things. We put our hand to the plow. We're like, well, hey, I'm on the straight and narrow, but I could have, remember the good old days when I used to do whatever I wanted? Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt because of that. May not have been a sin for Joseph to hang on to his coat and try to drag her for a little bit, and then, well, okay, man, this is just too hard. This is just too much. I'll leave that coat behind. But I sound like a nut when I say this kind of stuff. Maybe, you know what? You want to hear something crazy? Get rid of the TV. Want to hear something crazy? Get rid of the phone. I'd rather be in heaven without a phone than go to hell with my cell phone. I don't know why the world's going crazy. I'm going to do the best I can to make it look disgusting from God's word. The best I can to just kind of tear into that kind of stuff, because the people who come into this room, we must give heed to the warnings that the word gives. We must be willing to make some changes as a sacrifice. So, one weight that I opted to cover with you, that I thought would be the most beneficial, even though I just rambled on about a bunch of other stuff. Glory. One weight that I think is perhaps one of the most important things, and I pray to the God of heaven that you meditate upon these things in your own time. That you ask yourself, what is weighing me down? And what can I shed? What coat can I give up to make sure that my run is going to be successful? That I may run with perseverance and patience the race that is set before me. One thing that I wanted you to really think about, I want you to think about anything that might be weighing it down. The glory is the one thing. The reason why is because no human is exempt from wanting glory. And it may not be glory in the eyes of some particular individual. It might be the glory in your own eyes. The self is one of the greatest enemies. Because your flesh, mankind is prone to the pride of life. Also, Paul, when he was preaching the gospel, had to constantly remind himself that he is not a servant of men, but a servant of God. Why I'm telling you these things right now?
because I have committed myself to not just making you feel good about yourself. I love it when we feel great about our Christianity. I love it when we're encouraged and excited. But I see the way the world is going, and I will not stop warning you about what's going on in the world. I pick this book up and I read it, and I see things, and I look around, and I know that it's happening in your hearts right now because you're human. That's why. Because I'm also human, and I see what's going on in my own life. I see what tempts me. So I'm not going to be up here playing games with you. I'm not your servant. I'm the servant of the God of heaven. I don't seek to please you. I seek to please the God of heaven. I will stand before him on the judgment day. I won't stand before you. And you will also stand before him. You ain't going to be standing in front of me. You ain't going to be on the judgment day looking, where's Dave? Because is Dave going to help me out? Because I can't do nothing for you. You're going to be looking for Jesus to be there with you. And he said, cut that arm off if it gets you down. It's better to go to heaven with no arms than it is to have both your arms and go to hell. So if you got something holding you down, weighing you down, get rid of it. You got support. You got a bunch of people in the scriptures who did these things. Joseph was one of them, and that's one of the examples. He's specifically mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. That's where we've been. Book of Hebrews chapter 11. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all these people, they struggled with the glory of men. They struggled with the way people looked at them. You don't worry about the way people look at you. Don't worry about what the rich boy people say. Don't worry about what the famous preacher says. Don't worry about any of that stuff. You just go to the Word. Because all this stuff weighs down, and there's only one real answer. Only one real answer. There's a lot of yokes out there. There's the yoke of the phone. There's the yoke of the way people look at me. There's the yoke of the way you look at yourself. There's a yoke of self-consciousness. There's a yoke of selfishness. There's the yoke of self-glorification. There's a yoke of all kinds. There's all kinds of yokes, but there's only one yoke that is easy and light. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, learn of me. You take that yoke. And it's a yoke that was just preached to you, because the yoke that he says, Jesus wants you to succeed. He says, cut that stuff off. Hebrew author said, lay aside every weight, the sin which so easily entangled. So, maybe some deceptive self-proclaimed idea, ideal, illusion, or emotion, or feeling, or truth, or something makes you think that you don't need to be baptized. But the God of heaven says, why wait? Why curious? Rise, be baptized. You are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. Hebrew epistle gives you a list of some. You also have a cloud of witnesses. Room with once upon a time. I even remember this. I'm not that old. Only just a baby. It wasn't that long ago when people weren't bashful to ask for prayers. Once upon a time, people used to
Step forward and say, dude, I ain't waiting. Baptize me now. There was a time, and this predates me, but people had a little more trust in each other. We're living in a world paranoid. People don't trust each other. There's reasons why. I know of a lot of stories. I've shared some stuff with people, and then they like kind of wring it out to dry. There's probably there's probably most people in this room. You can just stop and think about it. Did you share some stuff with somebody, and then they just like aired it out like you're like dirty laundry for everyone else, the whole world to see? Yeah. Had an experience last night. My dad's in town, right? We just got back from a trip. My dad and I hadn't showered for a couple of days. That detail is important. It's actually part of the story. And it all makes sense. You're like, where is he going with this? No, it'll make sense. Today's potluck, so my dad had this great idea of coming up with some dish because Laura's not here, and I was like, what am I going to make? My idea was I was just going to make bacon. I was going to make bacon, put it on a plate. If you want bacon, there you go. There's bacon right on the plate. My dad said, no, let's see. He had this other idea. So we walked across the street to Food Max. I was dressed like a bum. My hair hadn't been washed in a couple of days. I probably looked pretty weird. Some girls pulled up. Their headlights weren't on. It was the middle of the night. And so I was like, well, I'm going to be a good citizen and walk up to them and, knock on the window and, hey, your headlights aren't on. You just turn them on so you'll get in an accident. They saw me walking toward them and they went, boom! They went right through the red light. They saw this crazy guy walking toward them and they said, I rolled down the window for this guy. And I was in shock. They almost ran over my dad. We were trying to cross the street. And and I was like, what just happened? So I said to myself, the world's crazy. These people are paranoid. And I looked at life through their eyes and I thought, well, I get it now. I probably look like a nut. But I was just trying to do them a good deed. And they thought I was going to try to hurt them, So, we're living in a world where people don't trust one another. But you got a cloud of witnesses. We talk to God of heaven, and we love each other through our difficulties. So if you have a need for prayers and a request, you need to respond to the gospel call, come forward so you can get to know my Jesus.